Within the ranking of kings, there is a cycle that exists. It's a particularly sad cycle, one that reinforces itself in destructive ways. We'll be exploring that cycle, and then seeing what Ranking of Kings has to say about the solution to that cycle, and then some practical tips that we can use in order to escape said cycle. Every character within this story has a relationship to this cycle, and we all do as well. The story begins with villagers teasing Boji and talking about him in a negative light. It's because he's deaf and can't speak. Being deaf and unable to speak are traits that princes who are to be future kings normally don't have. Due to this perceived mismatch, his own people think he's a waste of a prince. This is an example of people being unwilling to even look into Boji's perspective. They have dismissed him immediately. Another example is with Daida. He was kind of a dumbass at the start. He's the second prince and he acts the same as the citizens do to Boji, being mean and cruel. Not only this, he also has trouble understanding the life of a blind man. In a flashback, there's a moment where he's shown the state of the world by walking through town. He can't fathom why someone would have the will to live a life like that. Once again, it's someone who is completely unwilling to look through the lens of another perspective. Another example of people being looked down upon, I know, it's the last example, but let's just give one more. So it's the existence of the Shadow Clan, and they are rumoured to have tried to kill their own king, but eventually, this clan is almost entirely wiped out, completely obliterated. They have a terrible reputation within this show. With all three of these examples, when you think about them more broadly, those who are deaf and can't speak like Boji, those who cannot see like the blind man, and the Shadow Clan and its awful reputation, they are all outcasts in a sense. People on the outside. It's not just the Shadow Clan that lives in the shadows of the society. They all do. It's clear that just like in our world, there is a certain uneasiness people have towards those that are different. Towards those that have no choice but to live within the shadows. With Kage, the Shadow Clan member, when we learn about his history, we find out that he has difficulty finding work, finding food, and he's attacked by a bunch of random people. These people seriously need to relax. He's even used and abused by the members of society. There's a man he forms a connection with, and this man, this terrible man, decides to take advantage of Kage because he could slip into places with his skills and steal gold for him. Unfortunately for Kage, because he's wanted as a member of the elusive and destroyed Shadow Clan, he ends up being sold out and betrayed. Oofed. As time goes on, he sees how harsh the world is, how harsh people are. The Shadow Clan has always been a clan of assassins, so having experienced abuse, he takes on some aspects of that role of being an assassin. He becomes meaner. You kind of have to wonder if the role of assassin was something that was just given to them by others, and that if it's something the clan just kind of accepted. They were well, everyone else thinks we're bad, so I guess we'll be bad. Either way, he steals, he takes advantage of others. His first meeting with Boji is to try and steal his goods. But also, Kage has been corrupted by the state of the world he's a part of. From this we can see that for those in the shadows of society, there is an almost endless cycle of suffering that perpetuates. I'm sure that the man that took advantage of Kage was a sweet boy at some point. Yes, that guy was a sweet boy. But then he saw the world purely as a game of give and take, and so he reiterated that perception by abusing Kage. The Gyakuza village, let's talk about these guys, are the same. They don't trust anyone. They had no commitment to forging lasting bonds with the Homo kingdom. Rest in peace for that kingdom. They had only known subjugation. They had only known to deceive. They didn't know how to trust. And so, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, they're deceived. A truly unruly cycle. When those in the shadows are mocked and shunned, then that is the way the world will turn out. People in the shadows are people who are different, not the same as everyone else. But all people have specific differences if we think about it. Just some differences are more easily recognizable than others. Whether one is blind, deaf, can't speak, have rumors against them, have trust issues, everyone sees the world in a different way. Literally seeing reality in a different way. Everyone has a lens that they see the world through that is born from various factors. If we dismiss these realities that people see, then negative outcomes will continue to be reinforced. So what the hell does that mean? As mentioned before, there is a deep distrust from the Gyakuza towards anyone. This distrust from Gyakuza leads to Miranja's mother being murdered. Killed. Not only that, Miranja herself was chained and beaten, so some pretty horrendous stuff. they disfigured her face entirely as well. The way she looks now is because of magic. In fact, there's a scene where she tries to jump off a cliff due to the pain she's experienced in her life. So yeah, it's really, really bad. And now, Miranja has not forgotten any of that torture. Boss was the only one there for her, just him. And because of that, she's willing to hurt anyone in order to help him. She's willing to kill Helen. She's willing to raze the entire kingdom to the ground for her wishes. Miranja's awful past made her almost dehumanize the rest of the world, outside of those she actually cares about. If you think about it, there really is no reason for her to genuinely care for people who have only hurt her. This is probably why she's very willing to put the entire kingdom into flames. Miranja is another soul caught up within this cycle, just like the Gyakuza, and is perpetuating this cycle. Even the demon is caught in this cycle. That red guy with the scary teeth and the smile. Miranja betrayed him apparently, and now he's eating souls by the dozen. Once again, the cycle continues, a fundamental and unruly cycle of people causing each other suffering. So we might be thinking, how can we learn to not push away those who are in the shadows of society, and how can we diminish a cycle that seems so powerful, so unruly, and something that makes us feel like we're drowning? Well, this show proposes some solution. They come in the form of having people believe in you, and empathic understanding / communication. We'll begin by looking at the power of others believing in you. Our first glimpse into this idea comes in the form of Kage. When he sees that Bocchi has some talent for speed, his eyes light up a little, and he thinks maybe I can follow this guy. Kage tells Bocchi that his style's cool and that he wants to support him. This causes Bocchi to tear up because he's never heard that from anyone, as Bocchi's always been looked down upon his whole life. But Kage, the Shadow Boy, he's different, and it's quite surprising for Bocchi to have that kind of support at his back. This support is there during the harshest of times as well, when Bocchi goes through the betrayal from Domus, his teacher. That rejection cuts deep. He feels like Helen's also betraying him at a certain point. He's not 100% sure how she is, and he feels like his father doesn't really believe in him either. He feels like the world is against him, but Kage always pulls through. He is his biggest cheerleader. He always tells Bocchi to believe in himself. And it's not just Kage. Once Bocchi meets Despa, he says that too, and that Bocchi has great potential despite not having any strength. This external support is fundamental to the growth of Bocchi as a person and a leader. Another example of a character believing in another is Apis. For Apis, one of the people who really and truly believed in him was Miranja, and because of that, he felt a strong sense of loyalty. That loyalty is based on a feeling of being supported. Another example is Boss, believing in Miranja. For Miranja, Boss believed in her, and he believes that she is perfect and pure. Lastly, it's Daida in the Void. Hearing his mother believing in him, screaming his name, which gives him courage. She believed in her son, and that in turn helped him feel courage and comfort. As we can see, these are all small moments of support that really help these characters at least have something to grasp onto when it feels like there is a world that constantly tells them otherwise. Now, how do you have these kinds of people within your life? I think the better question is, how can I become this person for someone else? Because it's through that you will attract those kinds of people. What underlies this? How can you actually support someone completely? Well, it's to have empathy for one another, to understand one another. Hence, we'll be moving on to the next major theme, empathy and communication. This is an action that we can all do, and it allows us to support people and others to support us in turn, which can ultimately disrupt the cycle in some ways. As mentioned before, so many of these characters have their own struggles within the narrative, and it's not just these characters, we too have our own problems. Everyone has things that are going on inside of them, certain tragedies and struggles within ourselves that we're fighting against. Others can only get a window into these struggles through a commitment to genuinely trying to understand what someone else is going through. It's only through the fundamental assumption of everyone has their own struggles that you can actually connect with someone on a heart-to-heart basis. This means that people act in a way that makes sense to them based on their previous experiences and who they are. Therefore, there will be moments where people say things that may go contrary to your personal views, or do acts that seem confusing and even concerning. The only way to crack into that worldview is to be willing to have empathy for them, and a willingness to see the world in the way they do, and then to try to see what they see. Now, what's the easiest way to make this happen? Well, it's to listen to the struggles of others when they're speaking. So now, we'll be moving on to communication. An example of communication is how Helen developed sign language in order to communicate with Bocce. Even though Bocce can understand the words she speaks, without using sign language, there would still be a wall between them. Helen trying to communicate in of itself is valuable, which allows for them to have a connection. It's that decision to try that really helps, and the commitment to stick through it as well. Even when Domus uses sign language and connects with Bocce for the first time, he can't help but be proud and even says that Bocce is fine exactly the way he is. See, in this moment, Domus has connected to Bocce's heart and perspective. He understands that Bocce is fine just the way he is at that moment. Unfortunately, this relationship is corrupted later on both for Healing and Domus, as they pressure Bocce to become a stereotypical king with powerful strength. Despite this, it shows that the window into some form of genuine connection is through some level of communication, and specifically, the willingness to understand one another. Now, what is the effect of communication? What is the effect of believing in another person? I think we can get a glimpse of this through Daida's action with Miranja. For example, when Daida protects Miranja in the darkness from the onslaught of villagers, his decision to do so came from a moment of seeing suffering before his eyes and then deciding to defend her. That right there is actually a moment of communication and understanding between them. Daida accepted her suffering in that moment and then felt empathy for her and then defended her. The second this happens, she feels like a part of her broken heart has come together a bit. It's a moment of healing. Daida continues to see more of a life within the void, and he begins to understand more and more about her. He's essentially listening to a story and realizing that she needs to be cared for. In the end, Daida not only forgives her, but decides to marry her. He would only have gotten to this point, to this stage, by taking her suffering in completely and understanding what she's going through. Understanding someone will create a gateway for potential healing. Miranja felt healed after that. What this means is, it's this healing that chips away at the cycle. The opposite to a cycle of suffering is a cycle of healing. To further stress the value of communication, let's look at what happens if people don't communicate properly. An example of a lack of communication causing problems can be seen through Miranja and Boss's relationship. Miranja cares for Boss deeply and does everything that she can so that he could be happy, and Boss tries to do the same for her. Both people not realizing that they are causing each other unhappiness. People are complicated, and if Miranja and Boss had been completely honest with each other and communicated, Miranja would realize that she could never make Boss happy by making his dream of being the strongest true. That was a dream that made him feel empty in the end. And Boss would realize that the suffering that Miranja has gone through is perhaps not just his to solve. Communication and empathy are paramount within this series, and they're shown as like a doorway that we all have to take in order to heal people. And it's only through caring about what is happening internally within others that we can begin to cheer them on in a way that they actually need it. And that's what's key. Before you try to help, make sure you understand them. Now, who is the pinnacle of understanding another person? That's Kage, of course. Why? Because he listens to Bocce and he doesn't treat his suffering like it's something easy. He's always first to say that it's hard or "I'm sorry bud," and speaks to him directly and only then tells him to go for his dreams and to have courage. Now, what are some practical tips for showcasing genuine empathy and healthy communication in our lives? How can we all be more like Kage? First tip, as mentioned before, is to have the fundamental assumption that everyone has their own struggles. Without that assumption, then you can't get a window into another person's heart. The next tip is to focus on understanding. The best way to understand someone is to listen to them, to hear their story and to withhold judgment as a means of holding space for them. Only after that will you then be there as a cheerleader and help them. A great technique is by asking open-ended questions like, what was that like for you? What happened? How was that experience like? And then validating their internal experience by summarizing what they tell you. This has the effect of not only making them feel heard, but it also helps you listen properly as well. By summarizing what other people say and reflecting it back to them, what you're doing is also repeating it for yourself. The more you repeat something, the more you will understand it, and the more you can see into another person's point of view. Now, what if the person can't speak like Bocce? or there isn't like a means of communication via speech. There are other ways people can communicate to you, such as using like gestures, like visual cues and hand signals, a sense of touch, and genuine attention. But when someone cannot communicate, you may have trouble understanding their experience. In order to understand them, I think the best thing to do is to try to go down to the depths the other person is also going. To ask the question, what would it be like for me to be them right now? Perhaps also do some research. See, empathy is going down to the depths that the other person is at and holding space for that. Now, there are some dangers with this. Just like with most things, taken too far, it can result in unnecessary confusion and suffering. For example, there is such a thing as overly martyring yourself for others. So understand that this doesn't mean that you should only help other people. It doesn't mean that you have to listen to someone complain 100% of the time. It doesn't mean you can't be yourself. It doesn't mean you can't set boundaries with people. Some people have an easier time listening to the struggles of others, and some find it harder. Make sure to determine how much you can take on to ensure that you don't burn yourself out. You can only figure out what that is with trial and error. And understand that making this a part of your life is not an easy task. Showcasing care on this level requires practice, a genuine dedicated art, something to commit to. I'm not trying to make it seem larger than what it is, but I'm also not trying to diminish the effort that's required. It can be really hard doing this for a loved one who's constantly screaming at you. It can be hard when it's an annoying coworker. Hence, I do want to push back on one aspect of the show. See, Daida forgives Miranjo, and because of that, everyone forgives Miranjo too. And this forgiveness, at least for now, is shown in a very positive light. But in reality, forgiving someone is very difficult. Even then, that's not really what I want to go into. What I want to talk about is perhaps how you can forgive someone and still have boundaries with someone. Forgiveness is actually more about the person who is forgiving. First and foremost, it is their choice. But the reason why we should try to forgive isn't so you can be friends with someone again. It's so that your heart can feel settled despite what has happened to you. It's a very personal thing and it can take time. Forgiveness is about setting yourself free. Once you do forgive, the unnecessary pain within you should be dissipating. It's the unnecessary suffering, such as ruminating about what has happened to you over and over again, never really resolving anything but still doing it. Or how you can get in your own way because you can't forgive someone. Forgiveness is more about the person who needs to be set free internally. And once you do forgive, you can still set boundaries with people. You can still be like, I know you're different now, I've forgiven you too, but I still don't want to be your friend. You're allowed to do that. So what I really want to focus on is this. Forgiveness, in my opinion, is more of an internal process within oneself, and boundaries are actually outside of you. Boundaries are extroverted, and they help you create the dynamic you want to have with another person. If you set some rules for yourself, then you are putting yourself forward to determine some of the factors of the relationship dynamic. So I think Ranking of Kings does kind of gloss over the struggles of forgiveness, and maybe this is touched upon in further seasons. Maybe it isn't, I'm not sure. There are moments where Boji can't forgive Domus for his betrayal, but that feeling is pretty short-lived, so it's not like it's touched on a large amount. That being said, I don't think this is a major scar to the series or anything. I just think it's a missed opportunity. Overall, I did enjoy my time with the show. Anyway, overall, these are merely tips on how to listen to other people better so one can have a better felt experience of what someone else is going through, which is something that Ranking of Kings touches upon. So once again, number 1, the assumption that people have their own struggles. Number 2, to listen intently, ask open-ended questions, and summarize/reflect their thoughts. The act of summarization will also help you understand the others more. Just reflect what they say in different words. Number 3, if you cannot communicate verbally, then try to communicate in another way. Gestures or sign language, or maybe do some research so you maybe understand what they're going through. And number 4, a rule from me, but I'm sure many others as well. Make sure to understand your own boundaries when it comes to showcasing empathy for others as well. Through this, hopefully, that negative cycle within the story, and then within our lives as well, can diminish. That those in the shadows can be understood. That we can all be like Kage. Thanks for listening. Now, moving on to my drawing. So for the image that I've been drawing, please go to my Twitter, which is in the description, to see the end product. Also, if you're a fan of Bakano, check out my Bakano podcast, which is also in the description. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching.